back on Halloween night in 2005. I went trick-or-treating with my best friend Alex. We met up at my place not long after school, hung out for a bit, then got into our costumes. I dressed as Spider-Man and Alex went as Batman. Once we were ready, we left my house and started making our way through the neighborhood. Alex lived only a few blocks away, so our route eventually led toward his street. His mom came along with us that night, while we went door to door filling our bags with candy. Our neighborhood had a lot of houses close together, and there were kids everywhere in costumes running around. After a few hours, we had both collected a huge amount of candy. It had been a really fun night. When we finally finished, we went back to Alex's house and headed inside. My mom was supposed to pick me up around 10 to take me home. Until then, Alex and I hung out in his room, sorting through our candy and playing some video games. His parents and older sister were home too. At one point, we heard a knock at the front door. We both got up to check it out, assuming it was just more late-night trick-or-treaters. Alex said he wanted to hand out the candy this time, since we hadn't been home earlier to do it. He called out to his parents, telling them he'd get it. But when we got to the door and looked through the glass, we saw an adult man standing there. He was wearing a dark hoodie, pulled over his head, staring down at the ground. We couldn't see much of his face, and it didn't look like he was wearing a costume at all. It felt off right away, especially since it was getting pretty late. We had already stayed out longer than usual trick-or-treating. The man knocked again, slow and heavy. We didn't answer. Instead, we went to find Alex's parents and told them someone strange was at the door. By the time we all came back, the knocking had stopped and the guy was gone. Nobody knew who he was or why he had been there, but we figured it was probably nothing serious. Alex and I went back to his room and kept playing games. His room was at the back of the house, and maybe 15 minutes later, Alex told me to look at the window. When I did, I froze. The same hooded man was standing in the backyard. He was just there, not moving. He was about 40 feet away from the window, still facing down, not directly looking at us. We stared at him for a few seconds before both of us jumped up and ran out of the room. Alex went straight to his parents and told them what we saw. They turned on the patio light and looked outside just as the man turned and ran off into the dark. We never got a clear look at his face, and it all felt really strange. Eventually, everyone just decided it must have been some guy trying to freak people out for Halloween. Nobody called the police. A little later, my mom arrived to pick me up. It was a short drive back to my house, maybe a minute or two away. Once we got home, I stayed in the living room for a bit before heading to bed. My bedroom, like Alex's, was at the back of the house. I turned off the lights, climbed into bed, and happened to glance out my window, and my heart stopped. There was someone standing out there again. He was in the same position, wearing the same hoodie facing slightly away from the window. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I ran out of my room and told my parents. We all went to another window together, but by then, he was gone. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept checking the window every few minutes, half expecting him to show up again, but he never did. Eventually, I fell asleep, and that was the last time I ever saw that man. After finishing college, I finally moved into my own house. I wasn't exactly thrilled about strangers coming to my door with their kids, asking for candy all evening, but I played along and kept a polite smile on my face. My property was fairly large, though it didn't have any fences, which often led to kids running around and playing in my yard. In previous years, I had even caught some of them spraying silly string and covering my house with toilet paper. That Halloween night, things were pretty typical. Non-stop doorbell rings, and my dog Nala barking at every knock and shout. It was getting late, well past the rush of trick-or-treaters, when the doorbell rang again. Nala went wild, barking like she had all day. When I opened the door, someone stood there in a full-body gorilla costume. The mask was the creepy, kind exaggerated, and unsettling. Not funny. He didn't say a word, not even trick or treat. He just held out a small plastic bag that barely had any candy inside, which made sense since the night was almost over. I still had plenty of candy left, so I poured a generous amount into his bag. I gave him a small wave, expecting him to leave, but he didn't. Instead, he just stood there, silently looking through the candy I had just given him. As I started to close the door halfway, I stopped and glanced at him again. He was staring directly at me, still quiet. I awkwardly asked, "Do you want more?" but he didn't move or answer. He just kept staring. The way he looked at me made my skin raw, so I shut the door completely and locked it. I wasn't about to play along with whatever weird thing he was doing. I went back downstairs to my den, where I had a movie playing, trying to shake it off. A few minutes later, I heard something fall outside, near the back door, which was just a few steps from where I was sitting. I got up and looked out through the glass. The patio light was on, and I could see that a rake, which had been leaning against a post, had fallen over. I knew how I left it earlier, and it didn't make sense for it to just fall by itself. It wasn't windy at all. Even though it was Halloween, curiosity got the better of me. I slipped on my sandals and went outside to pick the rake up. That's when I noticed something else. The door to my shed was slightly open. I had a large shed in the backyard where I stored my lawn equipment and tools. The light in there hadn't worked in years, so I used my phone's flashlight to look inside. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, maybe an animal or a broken latch, but what I saw instead made my stomach drop. Sitting on top of a big box was the same gorilla mask. The phone light only reached a few feet ahead, but I stepped farther inside anyway, scanning the shadows. Then I saw him, the man in the gorilla suit, standing motionless in the corner facing the wall. He wasn't some teenager playing a prank either. He was an older man, and there was something deeply off about him. I froze. He hadn't turned or reacted yet, so I started slowly backing up toward the door, not making a sound. But then, suddenly his head turned sharply toward me. My heart nearly stopped. I bolted out of the shed and slammed the door shut behind me. As I sprinted back toward the house, I heard the shed door burst open. I didn't look back. I ran inside, locked the back door, and immediately called the police to report an intruder. By the time officers arrived, the man was gone, mask, costume, everything. They searched around but found nothing. They told me they would keep an eye out for anyone wearing a gorilla suit, then left. After that, I didn't feel like finishing the movie. I went upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and decided to call it a night. Sometime later, I woke up to Nala barking downstairs. I rushed out of my room and found her in the den, facing the back door, growling and barking nonstop. I looked outside carefully but didn't see anyone. The shed door was still shut. Even so, I felt uneasy. I called Nala upstairs and had her sleep in my room. She growled softly a few times through the night, which didn't help my nerves, but eventually I fell asleep. The next morning, everything was normal again. No signs of anything strange. Still, that night stuck with me. To this day, it remains the most terrifying Halloween I have ever experienced. I'm not exactly sure what year it was, but it must have been about 4 years ago. On a Saturday, I'll keep this brief. My friend Liam and I decided we wanted to do something spooky that night, so we ended up planning a trip to an abandoned house a little way up the road from our college. It sat at the top of a hill, and some students nicknamed it the Witch's House because it was isolated on its own property and had been empty for years. Around 10 o'clock, Liam drove us up the hill and parked on the dirt just outside the property. Walking up to the house, I already felt uneasy. Just seeing it there in the dark was creepy. We both had backpacks with us, packed with flashlights, knives just in case, and Liam even brought a crowbar. Oddly enough, we didn't end up needing it because the front door was already slightly open. Once inside, the flashlights were essential because it was pitch black. The house had clearly been stripped over the years. Almost everything was gone, leaving only junk behind. Then, out of nowhere, we heard a thump coming from upstairs. Liam and I exchanged looks and agreed to investigate. He led the way up the stairs, which were very shaky and creaked under our weight. At the top, there was a small hallway with 3 doors. The first room was a tiny bedroom with an old, collapsed bed frame. The second door on the left opened to an empty bathroom. Finally, there was a door on the right, which appeared to be the master bedroom. Inside, the bed frame was still in the center, and the wooden floor had once been covered with carpet that had long since been torn away. We stepped fully into the room, trying to figure out what had caused the thump. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut behind us. At the same time, the room was suddenly filled with a blinding white light, like a camera flash, and then another and another. Terrified, Liam screamed and yanked the door open to run out. I did the same. We didn't even think to check for anyone else in the room. We were far too scared. We sprinted back to the car, and Liam drove us straight back to campus. A week later, Liam texted me a photo. In the picture, he was holding a photograph showing the two of us inside that master bedroom. He explained that the photos had been left under his windshield wiper in the dorm parking lot. I told him to throw them away and be more careful with parking from now on. After that, we only shared the story with a few close friends, and we never went near that house again. It was Halloween weekend, and this year it happened to fall on a Saturday. My mom always took Halloween decorating and candy giving way too seriously. It was almost like she thought she was in competition with the neighbors for who could have the most popular house on the block. We lived on a corner lot in a quiet suburban neighborhood, so when we decorated, she made sure to cover not just the front yard, but the side of the house too. Since Halloween landed on a Saturday, kids started trick-or-treating earlier than usual. The weather, though, was cold and cloudy, with rain predicted later in the day. My mom couldn't seem to understand that the gloomy weather might be the reason so few kids were out. Instead, she convinced herself that we didn't have enough decorations to attract trick-or-treaters. She told me to go up to the attic and grab whatever Halloween bins were left up there. I tried telling her we already had enough out, but she wouldn't let it go until I finally gave in. The attic entrance was right above my room in the upstairs hallway. I pulled down the ladder, climbed up, and switched on the small bulb hanging near the ceiling. We kept our holiday containers in a specific order, so I went straight to where the Halloween ones were. Only 2 bins were left. I opened one, saw a few decorations inside, and figured that would satisfy her. I dragged the plastic container toward the opening and carefully slid it down the ladder. Just before I started climbing down, I thought I heard something on the opposite end of the attic, like a plank of wood creaking under pressure. I looked toward the far wall where the rest of the storage boxes were stacked. It was an attic, so random creaks weren't unusual. I brushed it off, climbed down, and carried the bin downstairs. My mom and I spent the next half hour putting up a few more things in the front yard. The wind had picked up, and the air felt damp, like rain could start any second. Hardly any trick-or-treaters came by. My mom looked disappointed. She had spent hours making candy goodie bags with a mix of different sweets, and now it looks like most of them would go to waste. As the day went on, I went back to my room to play games on my laptop, while she stayed downstairs, handing candy to the few kids that showed up. Then it started to drizzle, which pretty much ended the night for trick-or-treating. While I was gaming, I heard another sound from the attic, another crack like something shifting above me. It wasn't particularly strange, but I made a mental note that it was the second time I had heard something from up there that day. The rain turned heavier, and by nighttime, thunder had rolled in. A perfect Halloween storm. I used to be a big gamer as a teenager, and even now, instead of going out on weekends, I'd rather stay in playing. That night was no different. I stayed up long after my parents had gone to bed, the sound of rain still steady outside my window. Then I heard it again this time. It sounded like footsteps coming from directly above my room. I paused my game, listening closely. Maybe my mom had gone up there to put decorations away, but it was too late for that. The noises stopped. Curious, I got up and peeked into the hallway. That's when I noticed the attic door was open. Before I could process that, I heard faint sounds from downstairs, specifically noises in the kitchen, the faint clatter of something being moved, then the fridge door closing. My heart started pounding. I quietly crept down the hallway to my parents' bedroom, eased the door open, and saw both of them sound asleep. My stomach dropped. I went over and gently shook my dad awake. "Dad," I whispered, "there's someone in the house." He blinked, confused. "What I heard, someone in the kitchen," I said quietly. "They were in the attic before that. I think someone is hiding up there." My dad wasn't a big or confrontational guy. He kept a police baton under the bed, though I don't think he ever thought he'd actually need to use it. He told me to stay put, got out of bed, and quietly peeked out into the hall. A moment later, he came back in and whispered that he had seen someone climbing back into the attic. He immediately locked the bedroom door and called 911. By then, my mom had woken up too, but we all stayed quiet and tried not to panic. It felt like forever before the police arrived. When they finally did, my dad went downstairs to unlock the front door. The officers entered and pulled the attic ladder down. A few minutes later, they found a man crouched behind the wall of storage bins. the same area where I had heard those noises earlier. He looked messy, dirty, and clearly hadn't been living anywhere decent for a while. The police said he was straightforward about what happened. The day before, he had seen our front door slightly open and slipped inside because he had nowhere to sleep. He had taken one of our old blankets from the closet and brought a jar of peanut butter up there to eat. It was disturbing to think about. He had been right above my room the whole time, and I can't stop wondering what might have happened if my dad or I had gone up there ourselves instead of calling the police. My parents chose not to press charges, but the thought of it still gives me chills.